Welcome back to another episode of The Mouse and Men, where we explore the grown-up side of Disney. Find us on social media at The Mouse and Men on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Find us on YouTube, where we broadcast the podcast. And go to our website, where you can get links to all of our social media and find our top 10 things for grown-ups to do in Walt Disney World over at themouseandmen.com. I am Bradley. I'm here with my co-host, Chris. Chris, I got a question for you. You don't have to answer it right now. What is your favorite ride in each park at Walt Disney World?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that it wasn't easy for me to come up with a top in each of the four parks because there's so much to do, so much to experience. But I love diving into it, and we haven't really shared our answers back and forth with each other, so I'm excited about the discussions that it may bring up. But yeah, I'm loving this. Also, I just want to say, every time you say broadcast the podcast, I can't help but to smile. There's something about it that, like, I need it on a t-shirt or something, because I just, like, every time you say it, I'm just, I love it. Let's do it. Absolutely.
Well, I can't remember which show of ours it originated, but somehow it came up, and I think you coined it, and I love it. So I'm just going to keep saying broadcast the podcast. We do that on YouTube, where you can see our faces as well as hear our voices. I always do some sort of background, try to change it every week. This week, because we are talking about our favorite rides. Now, this is not most thrilling, most grown-up ride to do in each of the parks in Walt Disney World, but it's just our favorites. We kind of got into a little bit of this in our first episodes, where we introduced ourselves, interviewed each other. But because we're talking about the entirety of Walt Disney World, my background is the old version, because they're updating it, I think, as we speak. I don't think it's finished yet, of the archway that says Walt Disney World. This one says where dreams come true. Then it was the most magical place on earth. But just that archway that you pass under as you roll up to the resort. So Chris, let's jump right into our favorite attractions at each park.
All right, where do we want to start? Do we want to go the park that's the oldest at Magic Kingdom? We want to talk about kind of what we've spoken about just a couple of weeks ago with Epcot. Where do we want to dive in?
So I think we start in the order that the parks open. So we're going to go Magic Kingdom, Epcot, Hollywood Studios, Animal Kingdom. It just, let's just kind of go chronologically. So
love it.
Let's start in the Magic Kingdom. A park that has been around the longest, so it's seen a lot of change.
Yeah, true.
A lot of, Magic Kingdom has grown quite a bit since it opened, with, entire lands being added since it opened in 1971. But Chris, if there's one ride in the Magic Kingdom that you have to do, what is it?
I think that's a good definition of how I came up with my list of the top rides, and kind of what you were just saying, which I didn't even articulate it this way until you just said that. But if I had time to do one ride in each park, what would it be? That's kind of my, I like that criteria, and we'll take it from here. I think for Magic Kingdom, if I could only do one thing, it would be Space Mountain. Again, maybe not the most, it is a thrill ride, and ahead of its time when it was first built back in the day, but certainly not the most thrilling ride at Magic Kingdom these days. But when I think of Magic Kingdom, I think of walking through the gates and seeing Cinderella's castle off in the distance. And so that's kind of in my head. The first thing I think of is kind of that iconic first glance. But once I think ride, I think, okay, I'm going to walk down there, get semi-close to Cinderella's castle. but then take a hard right and head straight to Space Mountain. That's pretty much what I do every time I go to the park. Very rarely have I turned left and gone into Adventureland and do those types of things.
Yeah.
But because it just means so much, I love everything from walking up and seeing it as I get closer at Space Mountain. I get excited about the ride. When I first walk in, the music that's playing to kind of get you in the mood for Space Mountain, it's my favorite music in all of Disney. And maybe, I don't know what it is, but there's something about, I think it's just like a French horn playing when you first walk in. This do, 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 ba, ba. It's this just, again, it's not very spacey, but it's there and it's the same thing every time. And so because when I walk in there, I'm immediately in this Space Mountain world that I have been in every time, all the way back to when I was a kid. I just love it. I love walking down the halls and hearing like the pew, 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 and seeing these things that used to display things that don't anymore, but they've got some cool, funky mirrors, all the way up to getting on the ride, riding it, being in the dark, everything about that ride, I just love. So I've realized that going through my list here, that so much of my favorite ride is more based on nostalgia than thrill factor. I love thrilling rides. I love roller coasters. I love so much about the different rides across all types of parks, not just the Disney World. But when it comes to Disney World, nostalgia is like my first criteria before other things when I'm making up my list. What about you? How about Magic Kingdom? What's your fave?
That played a lot into it as well, especially for the Magic Kingdom. I do want to talk about Space Mountain a little bit more before I get into mine. We've ridden it together at Walt Disney World, your single file. And for listeners who have not met us in person, you have about 3 feet of height advantage on me. Because I'm 5'7", you're about 8'7", I think, maybe 8'6". But I mean, I always find it funny when you first get in, you make the turn, and you're going through the tube with all the color lights at the top. It's funny now in 2020 with COVID. It's like, I don't want to touch any common surfaces, but we put our hands up and we run our hands along all those lights, and now I'm like, that just, they need to make it self-disinfecting or something like some of the elevator buttons they've got now. But, I'm reaching up and I can make contact, but then you're up there and I feel like you could touch your elbow to the ceiling of Space Mountain. I will say, because I can touch the ceiling there, I am terrified to throw my hands up anywhere on that ride.
It does feel like some of those quick turns and the way that you go through, if you put your hands up, you're going to smack the roller coaster framing itself. Yeah.
But what a great ride. So I have to ask, have you ever ridden it with the lights on?
I have, actually. I don't remember when it was, but I do remember having ridden it with the lights on. And again, because I don't remember when it was, I don't know if it was a ride glitch or they were intending on it, on the lights being on, because I know that that's been something they've done in the past. And I will be honest, I don't quite remember if that experience was at Disney World at Space Mountain there, or at Disneyland at the Space Mountain version that they have out in Anaheim. So I could be conflating them, but I have ridden at least one of them with the lights on.
That's awesome. Well, nostalgia with Magic Kingdom plays into my favorite attraction more than any other. I'm going with Peter Pan. And it kind of came down to Peter Pan or Pirates of the Caribbean. It's tough, but the nostalgia factor wins out for Peter Pan for me. I mean, it was a favorite movie growing up. The talk when I first went down there, or the story that my parents tell, is it was such a sensory overload that I just kind of sat back in my stroller, just just eyes wide, mouth agape, not wanting to do anything. And then when I finally kind of came to my senses, we rode Peter Pan, and we would get off the ride, and I would leave my parents and go hop back in line, and they had to pull me out of line. It's like, look, we've already ridden this 52 times. Your sister wants to ride something else. And what's so interesting to me is that ride consistently has a long wait.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what was next to it, but they kind of cannibalized that to make it so that the queue would go more indoors, and they would be able to do all this cool stuff where you can interact with projection screens and just give you some entertainment while you're waiting in line. That could be a show in itself, just all the interactive cues that Disney has
True.
installed. But Peter Pan is my number one at the Magic Kingdom.
That speaks to something that I think is the magic of Disney. When I talk to somebody about going to Disney and they don't get it, it's oftentimes because maybe they never went as a kid. They are not in the Disney World or whatever it may be. But when I started dating my wife, and she and her family would talk about it so glowingly, what I thought to myself was like, okay, I can remember having fun there as a kid, but Disney World's kind of where you go when you're a kid. And then you go somewhere else, Universal Studios or something older that you get to do those more thrilling things. And so I can understand the perspective of someone who really just doesn't get it because they didn't have that growing up with it feel. Because I went there as a kid once or twice, and then I didn't go again until I was in my later years of my teens and early 20s with my wife's family. And so it was then that I started hearing them talk about it of like, I can't wait to go and smell the chili cheese Fritos on Spaceship Earth, or to go and hear that music at Space Mountain. And it's like, that's not even part of the ride. But Disney does such a good job of creating something that you can come back and appreciate over and over and over again, even if the twist is going to happen here and the turn is going to happen here, or the video that plays before the ride is going to be the same video that you've been listening to since the mid 80s, whatever it may be. But it's part of the fact that it's coming that makes it so fun to see again. That I think that other theme parks that I've experienced for years and years didn't get that.
Yeah, it's the little nostalgia. Details. And,
exactly.
And because if you go to Universal or Cedar Point or Six Flags, you're going to have more thrill rides. Magic Kingdom probably has the most for a Disney property, or for the Walt Disney World property, because it's got Space Mountain, Splash Mountain, Big Thunder Mountain, and
every type of mountain.
Yeah, Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. I think that's all kind of the thrill rides. But that's it. But also Walt Disney World has a different purpose. Where those others, your small kids, it's harder for them to have things to do at some of those other parks, where Walt Disney wanted to create a place where the whole family could go and have a good time. So they're going to use their real estate for things that most of the family can do. But that being said, I still love those thrill rides, and I make sure to ride them every time I go to Walt Disney World. But
and I've heard quickly, just wrapping that point up, I've heard other people in some of the Disney podcasts that I listen to, they're like, for shame that I listen to anything other than just the Mouse and Men. But and some of the other podcasts, especially the ones who have season passes or live in the Orlando area and go to Disney often, I hear other people that go quite a bit, that you can eventually get to the point where you go to the parks and don't even really get any rides. You're just going to be inside the world, to go eat at that restaurant that you never tried before, or the restaurant you've been to 100 times. And so I guess it can become something that you don't necessarily get bored with, but you become accustomed to so much that you don't have to experience it every time. But for me and my family, because we only go once a year or once every couple of years, the nostalgia factor never wears thin for me. And I'm not saying those people that don't ride the rides as often, it has, but it's not as imperative to experience that thing that you can't experience if you only go once every couple of years. So, for what it's worth,
a ticket to Epcot, which is where we're going next, I think is about $109 for the day. Not cheap. However, I'm tempted to spend $109, go over to Canada, get a bunch of maple popcorn, and then not visit a single attraction and just people watch.
Yeah.
It's so interesting people watching at a place like Walt Disney World. I may have to do this. I may have to take a solo trip sometime and just go and people watch for an entire day, see what it's like. But let's get to Epcot. And Epcot is interesting because as we talked about on our series, as we drank our way around the world in Epcot, the attractions are less rides and it's more learning experiences.
Yeah.
With that being said, take us through your favorite attraction at Epcot.
And again, I tip my hat to my answer here in previous episodes because it's Spaceship Earth. That's my favorite ride. And again, it goes back to the nostalgia piece. It's not the most thrilling. If I want to get my heart racing, I don't think, let's go to Spaceship Earth. This thing's going to rock your world, man. Over the years, there have been even pieces of it that haven't been fully functional even. Because once you finish the majority of the story part of Spaceship Earth, you kind of ride backwards through emptiness, darkness. Sometimes there's like some mirrors with some lights going everywhere. But back in the day, I think that storyline continued into those places that are kind of now more dark than they used to be. And so the ride in and of itself has some areas where it shows its age a little bit. Even when you're going through that dark area and experiencing the story itself around you is not being told anymore, but it moves to the computer or the screen in front of you, and you get to make some choices about what would you like to do in the future. Do you want to talk about athletic activities you would do, or how you're going to wash dishes around the house? Those kinds of things that it then becomes. Even that is a bit outdated. But when I go there to Disney World or to Epcot specifically, if it would feel like sacrilege to not ride Spaceship Earth. And so part of it is the queue of seeing that old mural or the mural that's outside. And then when you get in, the metal people mover thing that you get on to get onto a ride, and then to get in your buggy and then to ride the whole ride and then to get off again. It brings back a piece of my childhood, and it brings back just even in the last couple of years, like I have to ride Spaceship Earth every time. And so nostalgia wise, it's my easy answer for Epcot, even though there are rides that I probably like more as far as thrilling attractions to get my heart racing. But it's got to be Spaceship Earth for me.
Well, and I think I got a new appreciation for Spaceship Earth because I rode on it with a friend who's an enthusiast about it. And it's when you can have somebody you trust say, yeah, look at this, the way they do this, that's cool. Right. I think that's how we get into things that we like, is somebody we trust tells us about them and tells us what they like about it. And then we discover those things.
It's kind of like when you watch a movie. Sometimes you can watch a movie and go, that was all right. But then you watch it with somebody else. And it becomes this whole other thing. It's like when I was at college age, it was like Napoleon Dynamite or Old School. There were these movies that like you sit around and half the time you're not even looking at the screen. You're saying the joke that they're saying on screen to your friend, like, shut up, whatever, those kinds of things, like Napoleon Dynamite or whatever. It becomes so quotable that it's easy to watch. But then there's another person that doesn't have that I watched it with all my frat buddies feeling and go like, I don't know, Napoleon Dynamite was okay. But it was kind of quirky and goofy. And so I don't understand what all the fuss is about. Kind of the same thing with riding a ride with a person who has fallen in love with it with you or before and gets to bring you in on their way of looking at the world.
Exactly. It's just a great way great way to be introduced to Disney World as well. You know, I wish all my friends who are like, nah, I wish I could say, okay, this weekend we're going and
Yeah.
just show them all the stuff. Look, I'm not going to necessarily turn you into a believer, but let me at least show you what I found really cool about Walt Disney World. For me, Epcot, you know, before our trip in August of 2019, um, I would say, in what I've got written down, is the Grand Fiesta Tour, because I mean, I love Donald Duck and the antics that he gets into, and uh, maybe it's the Mexican food. I don't know, but I love that little log flume ride around Mexico, seeing the guys get into all their little antics. But now, some things that I've got on my bucket list, just experiencing the different flavors. I mean, tasting a drink from every country was really cool. I liked
Yeah.
some stuff I never thought I'd like. I want to go and taste something. Um, Also, I want to get a popcorn bucket and just get popcorn all around Walt Disney World, um, because that popcorn cart with that maple popcorn, I know some people are like, it's just maple popcorn. Maybe it's because I'd already been up for about 8 hours at that point. It was really good. I loved it, and I can't wait to get back to try more of it. But Grand Fiesta Tour would have to be now one of my top ones. And maybe I said that because I knew you were going to say Spaceship Earth, knowing just through our conversations going down there, you know, we got to ride it. I've never gone and not ridden it, and getting in there by the skin of our teeth before park closing.
Yeah. Yeah. Funny that you mentioned that about the maple popcorn, because it's again one of those things that Disney just does right. Because I can't go into a store and get a bag of microwavable popcorn that is themed Disney's maple popcorn from the Canada Pavilion at Epcot kind of thing. I can only get it when I'm at Epcot. And so I crave it because I have the absence of it. I remember the land used to have a kind of an all-you-can-eat breakfast that I would do in my early 20s. So like 20-ish years ago, I would go with my wife, or before we were married, go down with her dad. And we would always eat at the land for one of our breakfasts. And they had this orange juice there that I think is probably just like Tropicana with some pulp in it or something. But there was some flavor that just was really good, because they did a good job of curating the foods that we ate while we were there. And so whether it was the orange juice or the coffee that just somehow, because it was at Disney, tasted better, that I craved going back to the land to get that breakfast so I could get my OJ. And so it was implanted in my head that I got to go back because the OJ is so good, kind of thing. Yeah. And so Disney just does a great job of creating not only memorable thrill rides, but memorable experiences across the board.
So now we're going to move into Hollywood Studios, the third park that was built in Orlando by Walt Disney Company. And neither one of us have been to Toy Story Land or Galaxy's Edge. So we're not taking those rides into consideration just yet. Although I know I need to make this happen. How can I co-host a Disney podcast about the Disney parks and not have been to Toy Story Land, which has been open for years, or Galaxy's Edge, which has been open, I guess, about a year now. So I had a hard time deciding, but they're both, I believe it's on Hollywood. No, it's Sunset. Pretty sure it's Sunset. It's either Rock and Roller Coaster or Tower of Terror. And as much as I love Aerosmith rock music, I think I've got to go with Tower of Terror. But I would be very disappointed if they changed Rock and Roller Coaster too much. If they put in a newer rock band, I think Kings of Leon would be a cool retheming if they want to have more of a modern music act. But Tower of Terror, I love the old Twilight Zone. I love the idea that in Disneyland, it's got a Guardians of the Galaxy layover. But I love the original Tower of Terror overlay in Walt Disney World, and I love that they change up how many times you drop. That part. So that would have to be my number one at Hollywood Studios.
So interesting that you said Tower of Terror, because for me at Hollywood Studios, it was a toss-up almost equal to Tower of Terror and Rock and Roller Coaster. But just for me, edging it out was Rock and Roller Coaster for me. So I like that we were able to switch it up and not have the same answer there. And again, I'm just gonna say this every time apparently, because for me it goes back to nostalgia and the fact that when I went back to Disney, Walt Disney World for the first time as like a late teenager, early 20s, that was the one that really blew my socks off. Again, This was, I think that the ride premiered in around 93, 94, something of that time frame. When I went there for that first time, again, in more than a decade from when I was a little kid, I think that it was probably 98 or 99 at that point. And so again, having ridden it a ton of times and then seeing Aerosmith stand there and talk to you, you can tell that the outfits that they're wearing are dated because it's almost a 30-year-old fashion trend that they were riding when they presented themselves then at that point. But for me, in like 1998, when I first saw it, it still kind of looked as hip as it was just a few years earlier. And so it blew me away that I was doing something at Disney, but with Aerosmith. And so when you first walk in and you're seeing all the records on the walls, that kind of idea of me, a person who loves music and actually had dreams of being a rock star myself, like I felt like I was walking into my dream come true. And then to go into the studio area and to see Aerosmith actually talking to us and then inviting us onto a limo, I was just, my mouth was open. It was the first time probably that I'd ever just experienced this overwhelming sense of, they nailed the exact ride that my fantasy brain would have made on its own. And they did that with the Rock and Roller Coaster. And so that was also the same time, just a few minutes later, that I rode Tower of Terror for the first time. And so that for over a decade became my favorite park because of those two rides were really just blew me away experientially. And for many of the same reasons, I could have chosen Tower of Terror as well. The old school, the Rod Serling, the theming, the creepiness, the creepiness without being scared kind of thing that Disney does so well. But as far as that nostalgia of just my mind being blown, Rock and Roller Coaster took it by just a small margin.
I love it. And we truly did not talk about this beforehand. So I love how that works out. And then finally, the latest park to open, the Animal Kingdom, which I think has started to, with Pandora, reinvent itself. Well, not reinvent itself, but get back to the original concept, which was animals real and imagined. That's why I think that Pandora fits in there. And I'm going to have to go with Flight of Passage as my favorite attraction. Although there is one attraction that I have not tried, and it's kind of a walk-through safari. It's a separate ticketed event. But I think that would be so cool. I love animals. But that Flight of Passage, Chris, you have to ride it. It is so amazing, just the technology that went into it. And that's what makes me excited about Galaxy's Edge, not being a Star Wars fan yet. We'll get there, and I'll document the whole thing on this podcast. But the immersion that happens in Flight of Passage it was so unlike anything else that they've done. I mean, I think like a Soarin' was close, but the involvement of the rider It's just you're in a hang glider. I mean, fine, whatever. But now you're riding on an animal, and the way that they involve you in that is just spectacular. So that's my number one in the animal kingdom.
I love that. And again, every time you talk about it, I'm so excited to experience it myself, and so happy that you have been able to go down there and experience the Pandora world of Avatar. But again, having not been there, that's not going to come into play. For me, it could have easily been, now I'm forgetting it, Soarin'.
Yeah.
Except for the fact that when Soarin' initially premiered, it was in Disneyland, and I experienced it first on the West Coast. And it was Soarin' over California, which is the same theming that it is in Florida. But I loved it so much because I was a resident of California at that time. It was like, this is my state.
Yep.
All in and everything. And so by the time I came and I rode it in Disney World, I was well aware of what I was getting myself into. And it didn't have the same appeal to me, although it's still one of my favorite rides to ride at California Adventure in Disneyland. Having said that, my favorite ride at Animal Kingdom is Expedition Everest.
Yeah.
I love that coaster. It's a great coaster. It's kind of got some of the elements of the Matterhorn that's at Disneyland, some of the elements of Space Mountain that's at both West and East Coast parks. And there's just so much to enjoy. Again, it's such an immersive world that I haven't experienced anywhere else. Again, there's even some that almost feels like you're getting on the Jungle Cruise at Walt Disney World, or Indiana Jones kind of ride. And so it takes you into a world that's very foreign to the world that I live in on an everyday basis. And it's got that thrill ride factor that is probably the one out of all four of my answers that don't necessarily tie into nostalgia, but just ties in because it's just a good ride start to finish. Like getting in the queue in line to the time that you get off and work your way out of the gift shop and get back out onto the main area, walking through Animal Kingdom. It is immersive. It is exciting. It is mysterious, and it's my favorite for Animal Kingdom.
I love it. So we've talked about these attractions. We're going to be talking about attractions more in the coming weeks. Let's get to plussing for this week.
Plussing.
So plussing, Chris, you brought this up. Watching the ride through videos, Disney has done some official ones over the pandemic. Other people, other bloggers, podcasters, video bloggers on YouTube have done these. What is special about these ride through videos that it should be included in our plussing segment this week?
For so long this year, this is 2020, nearing the end of 2020, if you're listening to this in the future, for so long this year has been about the pandemic. And for months, both Disneyland, Disney World was inoperable. I think still out on the West Coast, you still can't go. All the restaurants are shut down. You can't even go to downtown Disney and Disneyland. And so there's so much missing about that. Now, I know that in recent months, they have let people back into Disney World in the Orlando area. And I think I read the other day that both Universal Studios and Disney World, at the most part, and I don't know if they're allowing in just a limited number of people, but the people that they are letting in are at capacity in both Walt Disney World and Universal Studios. So it seems like that at least in Florida, things are starting to get back to some sort of normalcy. But for so long, you and I have been talking about, I just want to go. I just want to experience it again. I didn't know how much I would miss not having a chance to go. Now that I'm getting to an age where it's a little easier to go and do, like I can take my family down there for a summer vacation and would have had not the pandemic hit. So I have found a lot of biding my time by going onto YouTube and watching ride-throughs. Again, it's not the same as being in person. It doesn't create all the sensorial experiences that you get to have when you're in person, but at least I can go and ride Spaceship Earth. And not only can I ride it from 2019 because somebody took a video of it and put it on YouTube. I can also ride it in 1986 because somebody filmed it then too with a different narrator and the story is a little different. And so I can experience my favorite rides, even if I can't be there in person. I can have some semblance of the memories that I have from my entire life by going onto YouTube and watching it from there.
Yeah. And I mentioned this when you first brought it up. It's a bit like watching a movie without the soundtrack. I mean, you still have the audio, but you're able to observe other things that you wouldn't observe otherwise. Or it allows you to go back and when you do ride it in person, notice some things that you didn't notice before. So I love this. Like you said, being able to go back in time. Mr. Toad's Wild Ride. I can go back and ride that again. But I love this, especially as we get into our discussion of attractions in all the different parks. If something piques your interest, you can go find it on YouTube and ride it virtually. Check it out for yourself. So let us know what your favorite attractions are at each park. We may include it on a future episode when we discuss each park individually. You can do that through social media at The Mouse and Men on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. You can also just watch us on this podcast on YouTube. You can also go to themouseandmen.com where you can get links to all that. You can contact us, email us your input on, hey, what's the best attraction at each of the parks. All that to say, Chris, don't grow up too fast.
Keep exploring.